Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone. So yes, I'm going to talk about a project that has been ongoing in the last 3 years in Huddersfield and Durham. So that's a joint project between myself, but also Michael Clark and Peter Manning. So they are sorry, but they just couldn't make it for today. So basically what I'm going to do now is to introduce the project and its broad context and its connection to today's conference, but then I will basically demo the tools that we have been developing and that we are hopefully going to use in a research context, but also in a pedagogical context. So TACM stands for Technology and Creativity in Electroacoustic Music. So it's been funded by the UK's AHRC from 2012 to this year, basically. It's now finished, but we are still polishing a couple of things. And its main idea is to investigate the relationship between technological innovation and composition, basically, but also performance within electroacoustic music. So I'll go in a bit more detail on this in a couple of minutes, but just to say that the University of Huddersfield has a kind of long-term tradition of developing software tools for teaching purposes. So there are a couple of earlier details that you may already know here. But now I'd like to say that the main concept behind this TACM project is the idea of interactive oral analysis. So the idea is to consider the fact that musicologists on electroacoustic music and on, let's say, digital sound basically often present their analysis as text, while it obviously makes definitely more sense to present it as sound and to add a kind of interactive component to that, to the dissemination of that research. So Michael Clark, who is the first author of basically this presentation, has done a couple of analyses before this project happened. So Jonathan Harvis, Mortuos Plango Vivos Voco, Denis Mollet, One Chimes, Boulez Anthem 2. And now we are basically investigating a set of 8 case studies that are Chowning, Truax, Manoury, Daumont, Wishart, Harvey, Leap, and Barrett. So we've been trying to make a list of 8 works that are kind of representative of the electroacoustic music repertoire. Obviously, it's been extremely painful to make that selection because, I mean, just, you know what I mean. But today I'm going to just try to present the software that we've been developing for the study of Chowning Stria, Truax River Run, Daumont Phonergy, Wishart Imago, and Leap music for tuba and computer, all this in 15 minutes. Usually when we talk in conferences, we focus on one work and we present the whole approach for one work, but for today I thought it would be nicer to just quickly introduce one specific aspect of each of these case studies. So that's what I'm going to do now. But before doing so, it's worth saying that in the first instance, this project was not designed as a teaching project, but really as a musicological project, as an analytical project, historical project as well. But that now that this project is over, we have received in conferences expressions of interest from teachers in universities. So on the one hand, we are trying to start disseminating it in universities as a teaching tool for some of you that may be interested in one particular work or in some of them. But then we'll try to move forward and make that simpler to try to target a younger audience, which of course is very challenging, but very exciting also. So I'll leave this PowerPoint and start presenting the Daumont case. So I think that, yep, it looks okay. So just before I move on to what I want to exactly show about this Francis Daumont case study is to show you the global way that the software we do looks like. We have just submitted a book proposal, so for each of our 8 composers and works, there will be a book chapter introducing historical aspects, contextual aspects, and on the other hand, some analytical text that will be linked to the software, so that here you've got on the left, you've got a set of roughly 16 or 18 or 20, depending on the cases, interactive presentations, and you can typically go from a first example that presents a work as a whole, like here you've got the whole kind of Pro Tools emulation of Fonurgy by Francis. So you can play, the whole thing, but you can play individual elements on their own, but then the idea is to try to move backwards and get into the details of each technical aspect that the composer used to elaborate his piece. So here, for instance, we've got a nice simple example of seeing how Daumont used some sounds by Pierre Schaeffer, then used them, transformed them in another piece, and then that was used as a material for Fonurgy. And between these interactive explorers, you've got some videos that are still nice to watch. You've got the composer talking himself about his own work, and so on and so on. So for teaching aspects of this Daumont case, one thing that we have here is an emulation of a system that some of you know and probably have used, that is called CITER. So it's basically GRM's, in a GRM's first real-time digital signal processor that was developed roughly from the early 80s. And that stopped in the mid-90s, basically. Francis Daumont, in fact, was the last kind of user of this software. And the successor of CITER is in some way the now very well-known GRM tools. But for us, it was quite crucial to understand how this was used as a musical instrument, basically, in the context of the composition of this piece. So we've been trying to emulate a simple model of this regarding the user interface. So I'm just going to show you how this works. I don't have a great resolution now, but it should do. So you can basically select an instrument. Of course, CITER had many more than these, but we just focused on a couple of ones just to get an idea of how it works. So I will use the filter instrument, 8 resonant filters in parallel. So the way you interact with that is that you start playing a sample like this. So if I bypass CITER, it sounds like this. Okay. And now we've got simple sliders to change any amplitude of the 8 filters. And you've got the second screen here to adjust the resonance and things like that. So nothing new, nothing special regarding what we already know, but an interesting feature here is that you can, there are other ones, but the main one is probably that you can make presets as balls, what was called bool in the original system. So basically, if you're happy with that setting, you make a preset out of it, then you go back to the slider screen. So I'll make something obviously different quickly. Then you can change the size of your balls and make a new preset, and then basically from that, if you go to the game mode, you can interpolate between the two presets like that. So it's quite an efficient way to get to learn how Francis played a lot with that, improvising with this kind of system. And when you've got a feeling of how it works as a according to this very specific interface, you get to understand how some gestures were actually done. Okay, so that's it for now. In fact, we currently are talking with Daniel Teruggi and Yann Jesselin at GRM to try to make this an actual simulation, but maybe I'll talk about this in 1 year or so. Okay, so one other aspect of learning from this software is just to see composers talk and demonstrate their own software when obviously it still exists. So for Barry Truax's case, you may or may not know that Barry Truax is the first person to have implemented real-time granular synthesis with computers. So I'll just show you very quickly how he reconstructed one single sequence of River Run, his kind of key work back in 1986. So I'll just let him talk.
Okay, I'm going to show an actual track that was generated for the piece River Run. There were quite a few of those generated, about 20 or so, and each one of them was recorded onto an 8-track tape because we had just gotten this really nice 8-track tape recorder. So 4 stereo pairs could nicely go onto this tape as source material in real time. And so the each sequence then correspond to 4 runs through of the 8-track tape. So the starting point of each one would often be related in some kind of way in terms of frequencies, and then similar ramps were used on each track. And then once all 4 tracks were done, you'd go and listen to them and hear the result. So for instance, here's a track that is in the one of the middle sections of the piece, which are rapidly expanding from the granular texture at the beginning, which is fairly dense, and deliberately going out of the granular range to individual sort of durations that you can almost hear individual events, and then back again. So we're ramping 6 different parameters, including the speed of the ramp itself. So the speed of the ramp, it will slow down, and then when I reverse the ramp, it will speed up again. So we're going to the high density and then going out and then back again in a kind of arc sort of form. So here's the start texture. And now we're going to start the ramp, an ascending ramp. So we're still in the granular domain, but very quickly we move out of it into individual grains. Expanding the frequency range, and then let's shorten it a little bit and go back down again.
Okay, I don't have much time, so I need to stop this, but this is also nice in the sense that you can link that direct interview to our own emulation of that system. So here, for instance, if I load the preset that corresponds to what we've just been seeing, I can very easily play myself the same way that he kind of did at that time, and by doing so learn a bit more about the early days of granular synthesis, but also about general properties of granular synthesis, frequency of grains, duration, and very simple things like that. Okay. Now I'm moving on towards Trevor Wishart, who is using computers and develops his own software among the computer desktop project, and in his case with Soundloom, in a very different way, which in the case of Imago, which is a work composed in 2002, he basically took a whiskey glass sound from a John T. Harrison piece and just made a 25-minute piece out of that very simple and short sound. So how do we get to understand and teach how this quite amazing transformation process looks like? Well, it's not a complete map here, but it's been focusing on a couple of sections. Basically, the idea is that here you've got this initial whiskey glass sound that I just play now. So it just sounds like that. And then again, he made plenty of successive transformations, offline transformations of that with his own software. So we've been trying to basically show how he went from that to some subsections of Imago. So I'll just play the beginning of this one here. Okay, so looking at this graph, basically, if I go back to the beginning, I can hear very simple transformations like this. It's so small that I cannot click on it, but yep. So just the original sound sliced, but then transposed downwards. Transposed plus mixed with the original, this kind of stuff. And then at some point he uses simple iterative processes like that. Another one here. Then mixes them together. And so on, and you get this, you know, what he calls this gamelan motif like that easily. And on the other hand, he uses some more textural processes from the same material again. So if I move back here, simple iteration, but then put in a brassage that makes this sound like that, and then transposed upwards and downwards, and all these transpositions are then merged together here. So that in the first instance it would have been quite tough to guess that this you know, very heavy sound comes from that tiny whiskey glass, but now basically we've got a quite clear view of how this was done. So I cannot really talk about this now, but you can also at each node of this graph open the corresponding process and play with its parameters and so on, but I won't demonstrate this now. Laurent, I'm not sure how much time I've got left, but 5 minutes, perfect. So I'm going to now present another aspect, that is how do we make musical structures from algorithmic input. So the next case is Chowning's tria. The map that you're going to see in a minute represents tria according to its constitutive synthesis elements. So if I click on any of these elements, those of you who know tria will of course recognize this kind of flavor. You can also play it as a whole, but what interests me now is the way Chowning generated these elements, and if I change my color coding here so that elements colors don't represent spatialization in the quadrophonic field, but are grouped as events. Here, each different color represents an event, which means that John has inputted a set of parameters to an algorithm written in the Stanford Artificial Intelligence language in, well, roughly 1977. And now the idea is that we, as users or as teachers, we can play with that algorithm. So here I skip details of musicological purposes, intentions, but on the left here you've got 23 of the relevant 26 parameters that he actually used. So for instance, here I've got the first event of tria, but I could as well you know, take the data of any of the events. We still have the data for that. So if I just make a bit more space, I can play with structural parameters such as something as simple as the number of elements. Again, play. So here it's interesting because you clearly recognize the very beginning of Stria. But you get to hear how different it sounds from the original if you just change one of these parameters. So here you can change the basis frequency. You can change some timing parameters. So in that case, the time within which event start happening. Here, duration scaling for each element, and so on and so on. So the interesting fact here is that whatever I tweak, I still have this very charming, this very specific, Stria flavor, basically, even if I go into frequency ranges that that are not really relevant. In fact, the algorithm really has a kind of unique personality, we could say. But of course, that's something that could be discussed for hours. So that was it for this aspect. And last, since I've got a bit of time, I'm just going to talk about a real-time piece. So we've got Manuri, Lippi, and Harvey as real-time, music for instruments and real-time electronics. So here the idea is that for getting to understand how a typical IRCAM-like max patch works, if you've got generally easily access to these max patches, but they're so messy that it's a nightmare even for excellent max patchers to get into them. They're generally huge and not very elegantly. I don't want to offend anybody, but not very elegantly programmed. They've got different styles, and it's always difficult to follow the QList path and things like that. So here what we've got is a kind of diagram showing how the tuba sound goes in different processes. So if I go through the whole one, sorry, I should have anticipated that. That's in some way it's quite in Kort's style, so he won't be upset about that. So just, in fact, it's at some point the harmonizers get so loud that in fact I should put the volume to -24 here. If I now go back to the beginning, I can play a simple tuba sample that goes into a bunch of that goes into a Sigmund object for spectral analysis, and that the data that goes out of the Sigmund object then drives oscillator banks that themselves go into a reverberation just at that point. So if I want to focus on one of these processes, I can just bypass the reverb, for instance. So now we just hear resynthesis and spatialization. And if I want to play with the parameters of one of these processes, I can access a panel here. For instance, I can increase the feedback of the reverb to get this kind of typical cheap reverberation that goes into a kind of infinite loop, and so on and so on. And if I now move a bit forward, so here this quite typical sound, this sound that is very typical of this piece is simply a change in the waveform that is accessed by the oscillator. So here, if I play with several possible waveforms, I can get very different colors that you'll get through the whole piece, and so on and so on. So at each point of the piece, you can just sit down and explore the very simple parameters. It's just a collection of reasonably understandable processors, but then to get to understand what is the role of each of these processes in the context of the overall piece and the overall sound of the piece, it's useful to be able to stop and explore each of these parameters one by one. Okay, so I think my time is up, but I'm happy to take any questions or critics or whatever. Thank you.
We have time for one or two questions.
Is there an underlying framework that you use for all the? I saw some pieces of Max, and are you?
Yes.
You design a kind of guidelines that you apply to.
Kind of, yes. It's all Max. I mean, each app is a Max patch, basically, bundled into an app. And so, yes, I've got a common framework for all these cases. But obviously, there are so many specificities for each case that, I mean, there is still... there is still the will to reinvent at each new study. So your point, thanks for your point, because my view is that obviously we've had some funding for this project and we've had some nice time and so on to spend development time on these kind of things, but obviously generally people don't have time to make to spend 6 months developing low level stuff for musicological purposes. So I would be super excited on the, say, middle term to seriously think about tools that would enable people that are good Max coders but that are not full-time Max coders or programmers in general to be able to have this kind of results. But it's quite a challenge in terms of thinking about what you need given the fact that I don't know the work that you're going to analyze. So there are some interesting thoughts about that. Yeah. Yes.
The reimplementation of CITER was something existing, or you have to reimplement everything? Or?
Yes. I mean, basically, I really owe this to Yann Jesselin. Because basically my only source of documentation was Daniel Teroggi's thesis that he defended in 1998. So that is all about CITER basically, and that is a very nice source of documentation and the very details of how it works in terms of audio algorithms and user interface. But when Yann sent me the color screenshots of CITER, I thought, well, why not try to make a quick JavaScript to just see how we could make this interactive. And then I sent this first model to Yann, and he told me, yeah, well, that's what it was. So I mean, at least in terms of user interaction, of course, in terms of DSP, it's got to be improved, but yes, it was done from scratch basically, thanks to this kind of sources of information. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is it available as itself?
So all this software will be available pretty soon on our website, but we are discussing with our publisher for the book that will go with the software. So we need to be careful about what we publicly put online. But that being said, I'm happy to give it you from a hard drive now if you want. As long as you don't distribute it yet, I'm happy about that. Yeah. And again, we are working with Yann. He's trying to resurrect the only living CITER that is at the Conservatoire of Paris now, and to bring it back to GRM and to try to dig out documentation so that we could make an actual simulation of, of all the features of the original CITER. Yeah.
Thank you.
Merci. Thank you.